You look at a water park and you see a business that basically prints money in the summer. Charge $50 or $60 a ticket, pack the parking lot, sell some sunscreen and pizza, and let physics do the rest. Water goes downhill, people scream, everyone's happy. It feels like one of the simplest businesses in the world to understand. It isn't. Underneath the slides is one of the most punishing capital structures in the entire leisure industry. And the reason most water parks struggle has almost nothing to do with how much fun people are having. It has to do with a set of invisible costs that never show up in the brochure, and a single category of risk that quietly controls nearly every decision the owner makes, from how tall a slide can be to whether the park survives its own success. To understand why, you have to stop thinking of a water park as an entertainment product and start thinking of it as something closer to a small, privately owned municipal water utility that happens to have slides attached to it. That reframing matters because a water park is not really selling thrill rides. It's operating a continuous, heavily regulated water treatment and life safety system, and the thrill rides are just the visible layers sitting on top of it. Before a single guest buys a ticket, the owner has already spent years and enormous sums of money on things nobody photographs for Instagram. Land acquisition alone is a serious hurdle because a water park needs far more space than its footprint suggests. Parking, drainage, water storage, filtration buildings, staff facilities, and buffer zones for noise and safety. Then comes the water infrastructure itself, pumps capable of moving enormous volumes of water per hour, filtration systems that meet health department standards, and heating systems if the park wants to extend its season even by a few weeks. Every wave pool, lazy river, and slide is really a small hydraulic engineering project, inspected and re-inspected before it's allowed to touch a human body. And then there's the cost that quietly dwarfs almost everything else: insurance. This is the part almost nobody outside the industry thinks about, and it's the thread that runs through the entire economics of owning a water park. A facility where thousands of strangers a day willingly propel themselves down slick, high-speed surfaces, dive into deep water, and stand in crowded wave pools is, from an actuarial standpoint, one of the riskiest environments a business can operate. Liability insurance for a water park is not a minor line item. It's often one of the largest recurring costs the business carries, larger in many cases than payroll for the ride operators themselves. That single fact explains almost everything else that follows. Here's why it matters so much. Insurance isn't just a cost, it's a design constraint. Insurers effectively co-design the park. They influence slide height limits, weight and speed restrictions, staffing ratios, the number of lifeguards per pool, the frequency of water testing, and even how new attractions get approved before construction begins. A park owner might want to build the tallest, fastest slide in the region because that's what drives ticket sales and media attention. But the moment that idea reaches the insurance underwriter, it gets filtered through a completely different set of priorities. What is the probability of injury? What is the historical claims data on similar rides? And what premium would make this risk acceptable to carry? This is the first real correction to help people imagine this business. It looks like an entertainment company deciding what thrills to offer its customers. Economically, it functions much more like a risk management company that happens to package its risk exposure as entertainment. And that reframing explains a strange pattern that shows up across the water park industry. Some of the most talked about, most attended parks are not necessarily the most profitable ones. A packed parking lot on a 90-degree Saturday can look like undeniable proof the business is thriving, but that single day might represent 40% of the entire season's attendance, compressed into a handful of good weather weekends, while the shoulder months bleed cash on fixed costs that don't disappear just because it's cloudy. This is where the seasonality problem becomes impossible to ignore. Most outdoor water parks in temperate climates operate for roughly 3 to 4 months a year, sometimes less. But the costs, property taxes, loan payments on the capital equipment, base-level maintenance staff, insurance premiums, water treatment upkeep, run essentially year-round. A water park doesn't get to pause its mortgage because it's October. It has to generate an entire year's worth of profit in a compressed window that's also entirely at the mercy of weather it cannot control. Picture two versions of the same summer. In one, the season opens with 3 straight weeks of sunny, hot weekends, and the park banks enough revenue to comfortably cover the whole year. In the other, an unusually rainy June wipes out the first month, and even if July and August are perfect, the park never fully recovers the lost volume because there are only so many warm weekends in a season and they can't be replayed. Two parks with identical rides, identical staff, identical pricing can end the year with wildly different financial outcomes, purely because of a few weeks of cloud cover neither one could have predicted. This is why an experienced operator will tell you the real skill in this business isn't building exciting rides. It's building a revenue model that doesn't collapse if the weather doesn't cooperate. That pressure is what pushes the smartest operators toward a strategy that looks, on the surface, unrelated to water at all. They stop trying to make most of their money from the water. Ticket revenue alone is rarely enough to make a water park work. The real profit engine tends to be everything adjacent to the ticket: food and beverage, where margins are dramatically higher than on admission; parking, branded merchandise, cabana and lounge rentals, which let the park sell premium comfort to the same guest who already paid for entry; and, most importantly, season passes. Season passes look, at first glance, like the park giving away money. A customer pays once and comes as often as they want, seemingly capping revenue per visit. But season passes solve the exact problem seasonality creates. They convert an unpredictable, weather-dependent stream of single-day purchases into upfront, guaranteed cash collected before the season even opens, regardless of how many sunny days actually show up. A guest who buys a season pass in March is effectively pre-funding the park's operating costs, whether or not the summer cooperates. That's not a discount. That's a hedge. This is the second correction to the popular image of the business. The ticket price is not really the product being sold. The pass, the parking, the food, and the real estate underneath the park are frequently where the real value lives, sometimes more than the rides themselves. Several major water parks operate as loss leaders for an attached hotel, resort, or entertainment complex, where the water park's real function is to draw enough traffic that the hotel rooms, restaurants, and gift shops around it stay full. The splashing you see is often the marketing budget for a much larger, quieter business standing behind it. But even a well-diversified revenue model doesn't remove the underlying vulnerability. It just buys the park more room to survive one bad thing happening. It doesn't protect the park from 2 or 3 bad things happening at once. And that brings us to the part of this business that determines, more than any other single factor, whether a water park survives long-term. What happens after an accident? Here's the chain reaction, and it's worth walking through slowly, because each link makes the next one almost inevitable. It starts with a single serious injury or death on a ride. In the moment, that's a human tragedy first, and it should be treated as one. But from a purely operational standpoint, it also immediately becomes a legal and financial event. Regulators typically shut the ride down pending investigation, sometimes shutting down the whole park temporarily. That halts revenue exactly when the business needs stability most. Simultaneously, the incident becomes public. Local news and increasingly social media spreads faster than any press release the park can issue in response. That public exposure changes consumer behavior almost immediately. Attendance drops, not just for the ride involved, but often park-wide, because trust in the entire facility's safety has been shaken, not just trust in one attraction. Lower attendance means lower revenue, precisely when legal costs from the incident are climbing. And this is where the insurance relationship, which had been quietly running in the background the whole time, becomes the most important actor in the story. After a serious claim, insurers don't just pay out and move on. They reassess the entire facility's risk profile. Premiums for the next season can rise sharply. In some cases, insurers decline to renew coverage altogether. And a park that can't secure liability insurance cannot legally operate, no matter how many working rides it has. A water park's insurability is, in a very real sense, its license to exist. Lose that, and the slides, the pumps, and the land become worthless as an operating business, whatever they might still be worth as scrap in real estate. That's the full chain. One accident, operational shutdown, public trust erosion, attendance decline, legal costs, insurance repricing or non-renewal, and, in the worst outcome, closure. Each step doesn't just add to the damage of the one before it. It makes the next step more likely, because a park bleeding cash from lower attendance has less room to absorb rising premiums, and a park facing rising premiums has less room to invest in the very safety upgrades that would rebuild public trust. No single water park illustrates this chain reaction more clearly or more publicly than Action Park in Vernon, New Jersey. Action Park opened in 1978, the creation of businessman Gene Mulvihill, and for over a decade it became one of the most talked about amusement destinations in the country, not despite its reputation for danger, but partly because of it. Unlike most parks, which were built by engineers working from established safety standards, many of Action Park's attractions were designed and built in-house, sometimes tested by employees rather than professional ride engineers before opening to the public.
The park became famous and eventually infamous for rides that let guests control their own speed, height, and risk in ways almost no other park allowed. A loop-the-loop water slide, a motorized go-kart-like ride called the Alpine Slide with essentially no speed governor, and a wave pool nicknamed by staff for how often people needed rescuing from it.
For years, that culture of risk was part of the appeal. Attendance grew, regional media coverage grew. The park became a rite of passage for teenagers across the tri-state area, precisely because it felt genuinely, tangibly dangerous in a way sanitized modern parks don't. But the same design philosophy that made the park thrilling also made it statistically far more dangerous than its competitors. Over the years the park operated, it was linked to multiple fatalities and a documented pattern of serious injuries. Reports have described at least 6 deaths connected to the park across its operating history, along with a volume of injury claims that became increasingly difficult to manage. This is where reported figures and first-hand accounts diverge on exact numbers, but the pattern is not in dispute. The injury and incident rate at Action Park was well above what similar parks were experiencing. That pattern eventually collided with the same insurance mechanism every water park depends on. Insurers grew wary of the park's claims history, and at points the park reportedly struggled to secure conventional liability coverage at all, with accounts describing the owner turning to a self-created offshore insurance arrangement to keep the park operating when traditional insurers wouldn't touch the risk. That's an extraordinary detail because it shows exactly how central insurance is to this business. When the normal insurance market refuses to underwrite you, the entire operating model is in jeopardy, and some owners will go to remarkable lengths to manufacture coverage rather than shut down. The financial pressure compounded through the early 1990s. Rising legal costs, mounting negative publicity, and a shifting regulatory environment, including tightened New Jersey amusement rights safety laws that followed some of the incidents at the park, made the original business model increasingly unsustainable. Action Park closed in 1996.
What makes this case study so useful isn't just the drama of it. It's that it demonstrates in a single real example the entire economic chain this industry runs on. A park can be popular, it can be profitable for years, it can be beloved by the very customers who were injured there. None of that protects it from the insurance and liability mechanics working quietly underneath the fun. And once those mechanics turn against a park, the operating business can unravel faster than it took to build. The land didn't disappear notably. It reopened years later as a ski resort with a water park component, Mountain Creek, rebuilt with modern, standardized rides, professional engineering, and the kind of conservative safety culture the original park never had. That transition tells you how the entire industry adapted after learning the same lesson Action Park taught the hard way. Modern water parks are dramatically more standardized than their 1980s predecessors. Rides today are overwhelmingly built by a small number of specialized manufacturers using established engineering standards and independent safety certification, rather than designed in-house by park operators improvising as they go. Height, weight, and speed restrictions are calculated conservatively, not to maximize thrill, but to minimize the statistical probability of the exact kind of claims that ended parks like Action Park. Lifeguard staffing ratios, water quality testing schedules, and ride inspection protocols have become far more rigorous, driven as much by insurance requirements as by regulation. And the industry has also adapted at the business model level, not just the engineering level. The rise of indoor water parks, especially attached to hotels in colder climates, directly attacks the seasonality problem, trading some of the scale and spectacle of an outdoor park for the ability to generate revenue 12 months a year instead of 3 or 4. The trend toward bundling water parks with resorts, cruise ships, and larger entertainment complexes reflects the same lesson. Diversify the revenue so the business doesn't live or die on a handful of sunny weekends and a spotless safety record. So what does actually owning a water park look like today, if you strip away both the fantasy and the horror story? In the optimistic scenario, a well-capitalized operator builds in a market with reliably hot, dry summers, secures manageable insurance rates through a clean safety record and modern, professionally engineered rides, diversifies revenue heavily through season passes, food, and resort bundling, and runs the business for decades as a stable, if unspectacular, cash generator, one that rarely makes headlines precisely because nothing goes wrong. In the realistic successful scenario, the operator still faces the recurring squeeze of a short season, has a bad weather year at some point that erases a chunk of expected profit, deals with rising insurance premiums as claims trends shift industry-wide, and survives by leaning hard on the ancillary revenue streams that were never really about the water in the first place. In the realistic negative scenario, a combination of a poor location, thin capitalization, and underpriced insurance leaves the business one bad summer or one serious incident away from a crisis it can't absorb. The same chain reaction that ended Action Park, just without the name recognition. And in the failure scenario, that chain runs its full course: an incident, a shutdown, a loss of public trust, and an insurance market that decides the risk isn't worth underwriting anymore, regardless of how many people still want to buy tickets.
So go back to where this started. You might assume a water park is a straightforward entertainment business. Build the slides, sell the tickets, let the summer heat do the rest. It isn't. A water park is really a capital-intensive risk management operation dressed up as a day of fun, where the true product being priced and sold isn't the thrill of the ride at all. It's the probability that nothing goes wrong. Every slide height, every staffing decision, every ticket bundle, and every insurance renewal is downstream of that single invisible calculation. And understanding that is the difference between seeing a water park as a place where people scream and splash and seeing it for what it actually is: one of the most quietly high-stakes businesses in the entire leisure industry.